Now midnight in Washington, 9:30 a.m. in Delhi. Most Indian goods imported into the U.S. face a 50% tariff.
First, top line here, it was a big deficit month for the U.S. Treasury. The government ran a $291 billion deficit in July.
Imagine this. Washington is on fire with midnight tweets. The U.S. economy is drowning under record deficits, and Trump is out there bragging about America first. But behind the noise, in a quiet office thousands of miles away, a man most Americans barely know is rewriting the rules of global power. His name? Mark Carney. He isn't a politician, he isn't a headline-chasing celebrity, and he isn't wasting time on rallies or slogans. He's something far more dangerous, an economic surgeon, a strategist who plays the long game. While Trump shouts, Carney calculates. While America alienates its allies, Carney stitches together new ones. And while Washington imagines it still sits at the center of the global economy, Carney is quietly building a world that no longer needs it. For nearly a century, Canada's fate was tied at the hip to the United States. One market, one energy grid, one military alliance. It was a bond so deep it seemed unbreakable. But Trump shattered it with tariffs, insults, and economic warfare. What he saw as strength was actually a slow bleed that exposed America's greatest weakness, its dependence on its own allies. And here's the twist no one in Washington wants to admit. The person leading this quiet revolution isn't a rival superpower or an authoritarian leader. It's a Canadian banker who most Americans couldn't even pick out of a lineup. Yet his strategy may end up reshaping the entire world order. Because what Trump thinks is America first may actually be the beginning of America alone. Trump built his brand on the idea that he was a master negotiator, a businessman who could bend nations to his will with the stroke of a pen. He believed tariffs were a weapon, a way to punish America's rivals and bring jobs flooding back home. But the numbers don't lie, and they tell a very different story. In July alone, the U.S. Treasury recorded a $291 billion deficit. That's not the balance sheet of a nation winning an economic war. That's the financial report of a country bleeding out. The brutal truth Trump never expected to face is this: you can't bully your biggest trading partners without paying the price. And yet, while Trump was busy pounding his chest and celebrating tariffs as victories, another figure was watching closely. Not with anger, not with bluster, but with cold calculation. Because Trump's mistakes weren't just headlines, they were openings. But while Trump was shouting, someone else was already planning America's downfall. Mark Carney isn't the kind of figure who dominates headlines. He doesn't need to. While Trump thrived on attention, Carney thrived on silence. He's a central banker who cut his teeth managing financial crises, a man described as a crisis surgeon. When the 2008 financial meltdown threatened to collapse the global banking system, Carney's steady hand helped steer the Bank of England and later Canada through chaos. So when Trump unleashed tariffs and declared economic war on allies, Carney didn't panic. He calculated. He saw the flaws immediately. Tariffs were nothing more than blunt instruments. They might win applause in rallies, but they couldn't fix America's deeper structural problems. Instead of strengthening the U.S., they were isolating it. Trump thought the battlefield was trade. Carney saw something bigger, a chessboard that stretched across finance, diplomacy, energy, and global alliances. And on that chessboard, Trump was playing checkers, and Carney's first move was a quiet masterstroke that Trump never even recognized. When Trump slapped tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and auto parts, Ottawa hit back with retaliatory tariffs of its own. But then something strange happened. Carney began removing those tariffs. To Trump, it looked like a victory. He strutted onto stages, told his supporters that Canada had blinked, and bragged that America had won. But this wasn't weakness. It was the setup. In hockey terms, Carney wasn't backing down from a fight. He was choosing the battlefield. By lowering Canada's tariffs, Carney gave Trump the illusion of dominance. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, he was building something far more dangerous: alternatives, new trade routes, new partners, new financial systems that could function without Washington at the center. Trump mistook silence for surrender. But silence was the trap. And then Trump made the move that changed everything. A decision so reckless, it pushed Canada straight into an unlikely alliance. For decades, Washington had been cultivating India as the democratic counterweight to China. Billions were poured into defense partnerships, military exercises, and intelligence sharing. In the eyes of American strategists, India was the future bulwark against Beijing. But then, Trump dropped the hammer. A 50% tariff on Indian goods. It was the highest in the world, and it left India reeling. Suddenly, New Delhi wasn't staring at Washington as a partner. It was staring at Washington as a threat. And here's where Carney saw his opening. Despite a tense diplomatic standoff over allegations that Ottawa had accused India of a state-sponsored assassination on Canadian soil, Carney quietly restarted ties. Within weeks, Canada appointed a new High Commissioner to India after nearly a year of frozen relations. The message was unmistakable. Whatever our differences, there's something bigger than politics: survival. Trump thought he was punishing India. Instead, he pushed India toward Canada, and even closer to Beijing. For the first time since the deadly Himalayan clashes just 5 years ago, Indian and Chinese officials sat at the same table, not as bitter rivals, but as reluctant partners against a new common enemy: America's economic aggression. And India wasn't alone. Across the Atlantic, another giant was preparing to strike back. Europe had tolerated Trump's bullying for years: tariffs here, threats there, and endless lectures about NATO spending. But this time was different. When Trump threatened 35% tariffs on European goods, the EU stopped bowing. French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire called Trump's deal a dark day for Europe and vowed retaliation. And Europe wasn't bluffing. The European Commission hit American tech giants with $500 million in fines against Apple, hundreds of millions against Meta, and ongoing investigations into Google and Amazon. For decades, Washington had been Europe's shield against economic predators. Now, it was Washington Europe saw as the predator. This wasn't about trade anymore. It was about sovereignty, the right to govern their own economies without Silicon Valley or the White House dictating the rules. But Carney's most powerful weapon wasn't diplomacy or trade at all. It was energy, and he knew America was addicted to it. The United States depends on Canadian energy more than it likes to admit: crude oil, natural gas, uranium for nuclear plants. Without Canada, America's industrial machine would stutter. Most leaders would have turned this into a blunt threat: cut supply, shut down pipelines, squeeze Washington until it cracked. But Carney wasn't playing for shock. He was playing for leverage. Every barrel of oil, every cubic foot of gas, every watt of electricity crossing the border is a silent negotiation chip, Carney declared. Instead of cutting America off, he quietly lined up new markets in Europe and Asia, nations desperate for stable energy suppliers after turning away from Russia. For the first time in modern history, Canada wasn't just America's sidekick. It was showing that energy dependence flows both ways. And while he was building leverage abroad, Carney was quietly transforming Canada at home. For generations, Canada acted like 10 separate markets, with each province hoarding its own rules, barriers, and protections. But under Carney's strategy, those barriers began to crumble. A unified domestic market was being born. Canadian businesses, once frozen in fear of losing access to the U.S., started shifting. Exports to America dropped from 74% to under 68% in just months. Tens of billions of dollars redirected toward Europe, Asia, and even Africa. And Carney wasn't stopping there. Canada's military spending, long criticized as weak, was set to more than double, hitting 5% of GDP by 2035. That would transform Canada from a junior partner into one of the top global military spenders. Trump thought his tariffs would weaken Canada. Instead, they were forging a stronger, more independent nation, one that no longer needed Washington's approval. And Carney still had one more weapon to play. A weapon Trump never even understood. Trade wars are loud. Currency wars are quiet, but far deadlier. Carney knew that tariffs could be blunted overnight. A weaker Canadian dollar instantly made exports cheaper, offsetting Trump's tariffs and even giving Canadian companies an edge in global markets. This is where Carney's central banking background became lethal. He wasn't just playing with tariffs. He was playing with interest rates, fiscal realignment, capital flows, even foreign exchange intervention. While Trump hammered away with a single blunt tool, Carney was conducting a full orchestra, and he saw something Trump missed entirely: the battle for digital sovereignty. When Washington threatened tariffs to shield Silicon Valley's monopoly power, Carney reframed the fight. This wasn't trade. It was about democracy's right to regulate itself in the digital age. Europe and Canada weren't fighting tariffs. They were fighting for the right to write their own rules. Trump thought he was protecting American tech, but he may have triggered something much larger: a global alliance determined to strip Washington of its dominance in the next great frontier, the digital economy. Which leaves us with the ultimate question: is America still leading the world, or is it being quietly written out of the script? Trump came to power promising to make America strong again, but strength built on intimidation and tariffs has turned out to be a double-edged sword. The deficit has exploded, allies have drifted, and the very countries Washington once relied on are now building alliances designed to outlast American dominance. Mark Carney saw what Trump could not. He understood that real power doesn't come from noise. It comes from patience. It comes from trust. While Trump was tearing alliances apart, Carney was stitching new ones together. While Trump weaponized tariffs, Carney weaponized strategy. And while Trump was fighting yesterday's battles, Carney was preparing for tomorrow's wars: currency, energy, digital sovereignty. Piece by piece, Canada is evolving from America's dependent neighbor into a globally connected middle power. A country with options. A country that can stand on its own. And the ripple effects are spreading. India reconsidering its alliances, Europe striking back at Silicon Valley, Asia diversifying away from Washington. These aren't isolated moves. They're signs of a deeper shift. Trump thought he was breaking Canada. Instead, he may be breaking America's place in the world. Because every ally pushed away doesn't just disappear. They regroup, they adapt, and they find new partners. The world Carney is helping build isn't designed to survive America. It's designed to thrive without it. And that leaves us with the question no one in Washington dares to ask out loud. What if Trump's greatest legacy isn't America first, but America alone? So, what do you think? Is Canada becoming stronger than anyone expected? Or is America still too powerful to be replaced? Drop your thoughts below, because this story is far from over. And if you want to stay ahead of the next shocking twist in global power, make sure you hit subscribe. Because what's coming next will change the balance of power in ways the world hasn't seen in generations.